Welcome to the 500th episode of this podcast. That's 500 weeks or nearly 10 years of episodes for product managers and leaders. I have a very special guest to discuss how we have seen product innovation change over the last several years, what has worked and what has not, what we're doing now. As a product professional, you need perspective on where things are headed and what is working, which is aided by looking at the changes that have occurred. So let's gain some perspective together from the knowledge and experience of one of the most influential people in product innovation. That's Tony Alwick. Tony is the originator of Jobs to be Done. I first discovered Tony when I read his book, What Customers Want, Using Outcome-Driven Innovation to Create Breakthrough Products and Services. And if you need to see that, if you're on YouTube watching, that's what that book looked like. After reading that, I promptly invited him to speak at the Denver PMN&x chapter. This was back in 2006. And he published that book while I was working on my PhD in innovation. And it really resonated with me so strongly on my research about why products fail. And I thought Tony was ahead of me in so many things and still is. Was so glad to find that book. He's also the author of the more recent book, Jobs to be Done, Theories to Practice, which is this great book if you haven't seen that. Both of these should be part of your library, and I encourage you to add them if you haven't done so already. Tony also has 12 patents to his name. He began his career as a mechanical engineer, product planner, and a market researcher for IBM, and founded his consulting firm Strategen 10 years later, which has helped leading companies generate billions of dollars in revenue growth. Let's jump in and learn what has and has not worked in product innovation. Also, we created an article format of this discussion, which you'll find at productmasterynow.com/500.
How can you unlock your full potential as a product manager? We're sharing the product management insights you need. They are based on the 7 research-backed knowledge areas for product mastery. You'll learn to create products customers love, enhance your influence, and elevate your career. Welcome to Product Mastery Now, hosted by Dr. Chad McAllister, product management professor, practitioner, and your guide.
Tony, thanks for joining us.
Chad, thanks so much, and congratulations on the 500th episode. That's amazing. 10 years.
It keeps on going. I love the opportunity to give some information to the product management community, but frankly, I am the boy in the candy store, right? That I love having these conversations with amazing people. And you were very kind. You were actually one of the guests in that first year, a long time ago, to come share some information as well.
And here again, right?
How
much has changed? Let's see. Let's get into that. That's going to be fun.
I do want to pull out a statement from this book, What Customers Want, which I think many people also call the ODI book, Outcome-Driven Innovation. And in that book, you describe the need for outcome-driven innovation. And frankly, the introduction, the whole book is great. The introduction sets the stage so very well. Not a lot of people read introductions. This is one that I have copied several times and handed out to senior leaders because it really does make the case for why we need to think about innovation differently. And if I may, I like to read just a short couple sentences and get your thoughts on this to set the stage. You said in that introduction, "It seemed to me that if we knew well in advance what criteria customers were going to use to judge a product's value, we could dutifully design a product that met those criteria, and that the product would be a success." So take us back a little bit about some of the frustrations that you've ran into about what wasn't working, developing products, and what led to those insights.
That's a great question. I enjoyed that quote too, and it really changed the way I think about innovation. The backdrop on it is I was working at IBM at the time, and we were introducing a new product to the world called the PCjr. It was supposed to take over home computing. And what was interesting about it is the day after it was introduced, the headlines in the Wall Street Journal read, "The PCjr is a flop." And it was a flop. But that led to me thinking about what you just quoted, right? I wondered, what metrics were they using to judge the value of our product? Right? Because they were saying it's a flop, obviously against some criteria, right? And I thought, wouldn't it have been nice to know that criteria like a few weeks ago or 2 years ago, right? And because if we knew how they were going to measure the value of our product, we could simply design the product around those metrics and we'd have a success. That was where that came from, because clearly people are using some criteria to say, I like this product better than that product, or the PC Junior is so much better than the Apple, right?
Mhm.
And so they are using some criteria. We didn't know what they were, right? And that was the problem. It's like, wow. And the other part of that is if that criteria was stable over time, that would be better yet.
Mm.
Because if they said, here's the criteria we're going to use to judge the value of your product in 2 years, and by the way, it's going to change every year, that wouldn't be as valuable, right? So we have to know well in advance what criteria they're going to use years from now to judge the value of the product. That was the thinking, and that led me down a path of trying to figure out, well, what metrics are those, and do they exist? Can we approach innovation from that perspective? And of course, the answer turns out to be yes.
And that has become your life's work since that time, right? Is
Yeah.
figuring out how to do that and then helping people, helping organizations do that as well. As so, this revelation from this flop of the PC Junior, that this was your career for, I don't know how long that project was, a year or two. It was following up the IBM PC, which was a big thing for IBM. They were in the mainframe business and they did PC. And then the highly anticipated PC Junior, I remember those times and was looking forward to that as well. What did you then take from that experience then to say, okay, how do we actually do this? How did you begin to understand customers, how they would judge products and decide on that criteria?
Yeah. So I started working in product planning. That was the first thing I did. I moved from my engineering group and I did design for manufacturing type of work on the PC Junior. And I got interested in just market research and product innovation. Moved to the product planning team and then began to try to figure out what kind of inputs lead to success at innovation. That's really it.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is before I did a lot of qualitative work on my own, but we hired researchers to come in and do work for us and try to figure out what people wanted. And I, in the same trap as everybody else, right? All solution space. People want this feature. People want the conversation just never led to anything stable, right? But then I came across one question or way to ask customers about their needs that became pretty insightful. And that was simply, what makes product A better than product B?
Hmm.
Now, the reason that works is because people are trying to get their jobs done better, right? They're buying products to get a job done. And if you can tell me what it is about product A that got the job done better than product B, that would be a useful piece of information. And we try to keep it out of solution space because they'd say, well, this product allowed me to do this faster. Okay. Well, this product makes sure I don't make this mistake, or this product yields a better result along this dimension. And after doing research for a number of years and listening to these kinds of statements, I started to realize that we could categorize these statements into groupings, and say, some of these needs sound like product function. Some of these needs sound like interfacing with the product. Some of these needs sound like cost related, buying a product. And slowly, this was very slow, it finally evolved to where I could categorize needs into three categories: the functional aspects, the consumption aspects, and the financial aspects. So that's what I finally concluded, that there's three key customers and there's three key areas of interest. Now back then I didn't call it getting the job done better. It was just this product is better along some dimension. And when I started going down that path, I'd end up with, this is when I started doing research myself, I'd end up with 200-300 statements that describe better. And then I'd have to organize them into categories. And I spent weeks doing this to figure out, well, how do they fit? Is there a pattern or anything here? And over time, I realized that there was a pattern, and it usually began with there's some needs associated with planning the activity and then getting the right inputs and then organizing them and then executing the process, as I said it. People buy products to execute a process. What's the process? Execute it, monitor the execution, and so on. That became years later in 2008 the job map that we produced for Harvard Business Review. But I didn't call it that back then. And this really evolved. There was no job map up front. There was just lots of statements. So a lot of this was really a categorization exercise, right? You got to recognize that there's 3 customer types. Then you got to recognize that customer type is trying to execute their process along certain dimensions, and so on. So the pieces started to fit together, and that's when the framework started evolving, and so on. And it became a more predictable process. And then it was somewhere around 1990 when I reread that quote by Levitt. People don't want the quarter-inch drill; they want the quarter-inch hole. I said, that's exactly it. These functions are all about creating the quarter-inch hole. So these statements are about the underlying process that people are trying to get done. And that became part of the theory. And when I met Clay Christensen back in 1999, that's what I introduced to him, the ODI process, the concepts, and so on. And he said, the underlying process does not sound like a very attractive way to say this. Why don't you talk about the job to be done? That sounds better. People are buying a product to get a job. Exactly. So that's how all that evolved as well. But a lot of being effective at innovation really came down to classifying things. What are we looking at? We need the right inputs into innovation. Then I started working on these metrics for the core job, for the consumption elements, for the financial part. Metrics that were stable over time, because I realized that the core job, like creating the quarter-inch hole, that's stable over time. So if we could tie our metrics to a stable focal point, we could have needs that would be valid for 2 years or 3 years while we're going through the development process, so they won't change when we come out. So that was the thinking. And when that occurred to me, then I started working even harder to make my statements fit all that criteria. And so now we say a good needs statement, and we call them desired outcomes. They're stable over time, they're actionable, they're measurable and controllable, they're predictive of success. And we have a whole set of criteria that makes it easier to think about them and how to capture them. But that's really the essence of all this, Chad, is thinking, what are the metrics people are going to use to judge the value of my product? Mm-hmm. So if you talk to a customer and they say, well, I like product A better than product B for this reason. Well, I can go to my needs set and say, oh, that's a functional outcome in this job step, or that's a interface related outcome in this consumption chain job, or so on. So I knew where the pieces fit, so we could organize them and then bring more predictability to the approach. And we just hacked our way through it. This was a learning experience as we went. I worked on maybe 100 projects from 1991 until 2001 by myself, basically. Mm-hmm. Just keep testing the hypothesis, just keep trying to make it work, and fine-tuning until we eventually reached a point where we published an article in HBR back in 2002, which kind of kicked all this off. It highlighted a case from Cordis Corporation where we used the process very effectively to really move the needle for them across many fronts. And it was that success that really was the validation to me that says you can come up with the metrics people are going to use to judge the value of your product years in advance and work towards designing solutions that address those metrics that are not well served by current products. And that's the basics behind our whole, that's the foundational thinking behind our process.
So a start from that original frustrating outcome of the IBM PCjr project, right? Yeah. How could all of our hard work as a team be a flop announced the next day by the Wall Street Journal? And just digging in deeply into how could we do that better, right? As you started now, Product Planet at IBM. And so I think it's very tangible for people to get their hands around. If we ask people about 2 different products, what do you like better about one or the other? I can see where a lot of things started from that sort of idea. And now it's really around these need statements. Can you give us an example, too, of about a need statement that how you figure this out?
Sure. Yeah. So let's go to a simple thing like cooking or preparing a meal. And we've all prepared meals. And there's measurable outcomes that you're trying to achieve as you go about executing that job. For example, you want to minimize the time it takes to complete the prep of the food. You want to minimize the time it takes to portion the food into the right amounts. You want to minimize the likelihood of overcooking the food, minimize the likelihood of undercooking, minimize the likelihood that the food's cooked unevenly. And that could go on, right? There's dozens of these statements that talk about how to get the job done faster, more predictably, and with a great result. So there's no defects, if you will. And these types of statements exist for any job, and they're plentiful. It's not as if there's 5 outcomes around getting a job done. There's often 100 or more outcomes involved in getting a job done, even some simple jobs. We did a project for Unilever on washing your hands in a public restroom. There were over 100 outcomes associated with washing your hands in a public restroom. Sounds like a very simple, uncomplicated job, but it turns out that there's a lot of moving parts.
Right.
And it's really at that level of granularity that you need to dig in order to get to the inputs that will help you create value. Right? Because everyone knows you're trying to make products more convenient to use, reliable, dependable, easy to use. But what does that mean, right? You can't measure that. I remember one of the first projects we worked on, the Motorola Radio Products Division here in Florida. The customers were saying, well, we need to make our product easy to use. Of course you do. We captured 25 different statements that related to ease of use, right? So we could define it. Minimize the likelihood that I don't hit the wrong button in an emergency situation, or very specific things. And it turned out that only 3 of those 25 were underserved outcomes, but they were highly underserved. And fixing those 3 helped to differentiate their next generation of radio products. But so the point there is getting to this level of granularity is really what's important. So that's what we do in every assignment that we're on. We figure out, well, what is the job the customer is trying to get done? And then break it down into its component parts and figure out how they measure success when getting the job done.
Okay. 2 things I'd like to go back to from what you just shared. So in what customers want, ODI book, I think the language there was, at that time, need statements were those things that we would minimize and those things that we would want to maximize to create value.
Yeah.
And I think that, from what you just said, all your statements were minimize. I think that's been one of the evolutions of your learning, that you have thought about how to just simplify phrasing need statements.
That's definitely true. Yeah, we used to be much more inviting to variations and realize that they're really causing the process to be inefficient. And one of those, as we picked up on, is how do you start the statement? And you're right, we used to say minimize this or increase that as what we would do. Mm-hmm. But what we learned is that people are trying to get the job done faster, more predictably, higher output throughput. They're trying to reduce time. They're trying to reduce the likelihood that things go bad. They want to reduce defects, right? They're trying to take imperfections away from the process, right? And all that led to the focus on minimize. Let's minimize the time it takes to do X. Let's minimize the likelihood of this bad thing happening. Let's minimize the likelihood of this defect occurring in the output. And it became a lot easier for customers to understand and to talk about, and for us to collect the information. Because we just took away one of the variables in the equation. What do you start the need statement with? And so we've done that for good, I don't know, 15, 18 years, something like that, where it's just minimize the likelihood that bad things happen, or minimize the time. And I like that approach. I don't know if Scott Burleson, but he wrote a book called The Statue and the Stone this year, which is interesting. And he talks about this. He worked with strategy for a number of years. And he talks about how Michelangelo removed the imperfections from the rock to create the perfection. And I love that analogy. It's like people are trying to get a job done better. Let's just remove all the imperfections and it'll be done better. Right. So it's the same kind of thinking. And it, like I said, it simplifies the capture. It also simplifies it when it's being prioritized too. Because we put these statements in surveys and have people rate them for importance and satisfaction. And if we stick with the same nomenclature, people don't have to rethink the starting point. It just becomes more.
It's very consistent.
Yeah, exactly. So that works quite well.
Yeah. Just that simplifying. Anyone
Yeah.
that's done the Likert type survey where we say rate on a scale of 1 to 7, how served were you, right? Underserved, kind of neutral, overserved. And when we start changing the direction those questions go, it just causes confusion for us as the people doing the analysis and also for the people taking it. So,
Yeah.
so I like this change. You mentioned in there, which I was going to ask you about too. It sounded like the ranking process, trying to figure out, like in your Motorola example of the 25 jobs that were related, or 25 criteria related to statements that for something to be easier to use. There were 3 that were underserved. What are you doing today to get to identifying what is underserved and maybe which of those are most important?
Yeah. So we still do the quantitative research.
Mm-hmm.
So, the way our process works is we do qualitative work first to understand from the customer what is the job to be done, how do you break it down, and what are all the metrics. So all that's done qualitatively through an interview process with the customers, the job executors. Once we have that information, we put it in the survey that goes out to hundreds, if not thousands of people, and they fill out the survey, tell us the importance of each outcome and the current level of satisfaction given the solution they use today. And they tell us what solution they're using too, so we can get competitive data, satisfaction levels for product A versus satisfaction levels for product B, and so on. So we can look product by product to see where opportunities lie, and we can look across the market to see are there needs that are unmet by everybody, right? But it's the same calculation that we introduced back in the 2002 HBR article.
Mm-hmm.
It's very simple. If a need, the concept is, if a need is very important across a large portion of the population, but only a small percentage of the population is satisfied, then we're going to call that an unmet need. And the greater the importance and the less the satisfaction, the higher the opportunity score. Very simple. We've worked on several variations of that formula since that time to see if we could make it better. And through our own analysis, we think that the opportunity algorithm is about 93.5% effective. There's some noise in the middle of the equation when it's not that important and not that satisfied. So there's a little bit of noise in the middle, but it works well on the fringes. But we looked at other approaches that would be more predictive, but they were so hard to explain that we decided just to stick with what we currently have. I don't want it. I don't want it to be you have to have a PhD in order to understand how to prioritize needs. Because saying, hey, it's important and not satisfied makes perfect sense. So let's just put the math there and go with it. So that part of the equation really hasn't evolved much over the past 20 years or so. It's been very stable, and it continues to produce great results.
Yeah, and it's simple for us to grasp. Important and not satisfied is the things that get our attention. As part of my PhD research, I had to have my people participating in that data, qualitative and quantitative analysis, to do some ranking. And I chose to do pairwise comparison, which is you pull out. So like if you had your 25 statements of easy to use, you pick 2 at a time and you ask the person which one's more important, and you go all the way through. And this becomes untenable for more than just a few statements. And so we have to find ways to make this work to give us useful information that isn't so laborious that no one is ever going to fill out a survey for us.
Yeah, exactly. And Chad, one more interesting thing about that is paired comparison, forced choice, those methodologies are really quantitative research methods designed in solution space. Because you're asking people to make trade-offs between outcomes. Which outcome would you prefer? But see, before that was used for outcomes, it was really used for features. Would you want this feature more than this feature? Which one's more interesting to you? And then that one, which feature? Would you choose this one over this one? So it was really, when you're asking people to make trade-offs, you're doing it in solution space. And we're trying to avoid all that because you could have 20 needs. They could all be really important and not well satisfied. And we're not trying to make trade-offs in problem space. We only make trade-offs in solution space, right? So we never use paired comparison and forced choice to prioritize outcomes. because we're not asking customers to make trade-offs that early in the process, right? If they have 10 unmet needs, we want to try to satisfy all 10,
Mm-hmm.
right? We don't want them deciding in solution space which one's going to be addressed better because they don't know, right? They don't know the best solutions.
Okay. I'm going to try to capture that to make sure I'm not confused about that, because I think this is a very important point. When we look at innovation processes, there's the upfront work to understand who the customer is and what problem that they actually have, what job they're trying to accomplish in jobs to be done language, what they want to move towards. And then with a clear understanding of that, we can start considering solutions and validating if our solution creates satisfaction for the customer. And in too much of the time, I see teams, product teams, and organizations jump into the solution. I think that's just hardwired into humans, and particularly engineers, like both of our backgrounds. We hear anything that sounds like a problem, we are on to driving towards the solution, right? And we get things wrong then because we don't clearly understand the problem and what is important. And that's what you're talking about, that the focus is clearly understanding what that problem is, what the customer's unmet needs are, what they're trying to accomplish, and what is underserved for them in accomplishing that job.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay. Yep.
And we don't want to make any trade-offs too soon, right? Trade-offs come in solution space. We don't make trade-offs in problem space.
Right.
We want to know in priority order, what are your unmet needs and to what degree, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, very good.
And,
So
yeah.
you went through a great history there, lots of details that will be rounded out for people if they do read those two books we talked about before. I'm curious, as you look back on this time in developing this kind of body of knowledge for jobs to be done, that experience from your IBM days, and putting together outcome innovation and jobs to be done, what surprises you most about the state of innovation as you look over your career, where things are now, maybe in comparison to where you thought they might be?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chad, because I thought years ago that when we came up with the approach, that everyone would use it, everyone would read the What Customers Want book, and they'd go do it, and I'd be out of business or in another business, right? And that didn't happen, right? And so even as we've introduced all the specifics, and we lay out everything in terms of what you have to do from a qualitative research standpoint, quantitative data analytics, the segmentation techniques, the innovation strategy development. We've laid all that out. And we have been proposing it and using it in large companies for 32 years. I guess what surprises me is that there's still, I'd say, in 95% of the cases, innovation is still ideas first. Right? It's not about understanding the needs. It's about someone had an idea, or our company has 50 ideas or 1,000 ideas in the idea database, and now we have to manage the ideas, right? It's like there's almost two camps, right? One camp is innovation management is all about managing the ideas that you generate and figure out which ideas you should go pursue. Versus what we do is we say, you're in a market, let's understand all the unmet needs in the market, figure out which are unmet, and then come up with solutions that just address those unmet needs. You don't need that database of all those needs, all those solutions, the ideas, right? Just instead of just creating ideas, because for every idea, think of it like this, for every idea, someone's going to have to sit there and go, is that a good idea? And they'll have to know, what market is that idea in, right? What market is it focused on? Does the idea address unmet needs in the market? And does it address those unmet needs? Now, you have to do that for thousands of ideas. That is a tremendous amount of work. And the bad news there is the answer could be that none of those ideas address the top unmet needs in the market. Right. So you're really gambling if you go down the ideas management path, where that's not really innovation, right? That's just trying to mine ideas. That's high risk. Going the other way, of course, we're trying to mitigate risk. And like I said, what really amazes me to this day is that most companies still go down the idea management path and think about innovation through that lens. And Chad, I think you're right. I think people are just hardwired to think about solutions.
Hmm.
Because I've asked myself this question for 32 years. Why don't people just do it the way we're prescribing it here? It works. It's great. It requires a little discipline up front, but it produces the right result. And I think it
Mm.
just gets in the way of natural instinct.
Right.
I think that's part of the answer.
Yeah, and this would be a much longer discussion depending what direction we go in here. But there's the common sense that we have heard about innovation for a long time, like you need lots of ideas to come up with a few good ones, right? And so there's lots of innovation math that looks like that. So I think one of the problems is just the human nature of kind of not trusting ourselves to use the process right, especially when something is new. And I've seen this in several arenas, like where someone will write a how-to book, right? Follow the steps, and you can do this. And then the author ends up still offering all these courses that are filled all the time because people aren't sure if they're applying it properly. And we have talked in the past, I don't know if we've done this in an interview before. It turns out that we both helped the same company. And I was there after the work that you did. And I was fascinated by how this started because the people involved read this book and applied it and came up with a really good strategy for what they needed to do. They did a good job of uncovering important underserved needs, right? And then your organization did detailed market research for them and created a detailed plan to support that. And they felt, okay, we got it right, right? Because we thought we were on the right track. We just applied the book, right? The knowledge for that. And then based on the market research in your organization's work, like, yes, the experts, strategist, is telling us we got it right, and this is what we're going to go do. And then I was asked to just help the product team and the product managers basically gain confidence about how do you innovate, right? I don't teach your stuff per se. I respect it wholeheartedly, but I probably should have tried to ask you for a job when I met you back in 2006 because I would have loved it. I think I missed out here, but I think there's this confidence issue that has come into play too, as we look at why aren't companies better at innovating given the tools they have available. And in this example, this organization, they applied your work. They did it themselves. They did a great job. They hired your organization. They had a great detailed plan that they were ready to execute on. And it was still the people involved in the execution. They just needed more confidence to know that they could innovate. And so there's some aspect there about,
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like in human nature, right? That we're not really sure about moving forward. And even today, there's still the CEO that hopefully some are listening to this, that their position is, well, we'll find out if anyone wants this when we put it in the marketplace. That's when we'll find out if it's a success or not. That's painful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's PCjr. You don't want to do that.
Right.
And Chad, you're bringing up something that we've worked on a lot for the last 10 years, especially in the last 5. We did an ODI project on this too. We apply ODI to markets that we want to enter as well. And one is innovation capability building. And so we studied that. And what we find is that it's exactly what you just said. People are not confident in using the data correctly. It's interesting. These outcome statements are very straightforward, but when a team is presented with an outcome statement and said, here's the biggest unmet need, they don't know what to do with that in many cases, right? So there's an education component that comes along with it. And what we've done for the past 5 years or so, when we do projects with our clients, we go do the work like we always did, but we added what we call a project cohort, where for every step we go through, market definition, outcome gathering, prioritization, segmentation, innovation strategy, we take the team through 5 90-minute live sessions on what we're doing, why we did it, what the information is, and how they're going to use it downstream. So by the time we're done with the project, they know why we have this data and how to use it. Then we go use it. So then we go into ideation, we'll go into product value proposition creation, whatever activity we need to work on downstream. And that increases chances of success dramatically. We did a study back in 2010, and we found that 86% of our clients that release a product using ODI have a success. But we also found that 40% of the clients we work with never used the data, they never produced the product. And it's for the reason you described. right? They didn't have the confidence they needed to really move forward. And so this training component, if you will, is designed to get people in the right mindset, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they can get out of that ideas first phase into the problem solving phase and learn how to use data in their current workflows to get their jobs done better. And that has proved to be a very effective approach. So the uptake is far greater than it was before, thankfully, because none of us want to do work and have the data sitting on the shelf, a great strategy sitting there with nobody pursuing it. So I think you're right, having the team come on board with this education component, and it's part of change management, which is getting
Right.
people in the new mindset so they're
Exactly.
ready to take that data and use it effectively.
Yeah. The old business adage about analysis paralysis, there is something kind of fun for some of us maybe that like data and reassuring that you do the analysis, you uncover what people need, what would actually create value for them and make them choose your product over other options. And you feel good about figuring that all out. But there is this step then that is kind of moving into unknown territory of like, well, how do we actually create the solution and the solution
Yeah.
elements that respond to that?
Yep.
And it sounds like this project cohort that you've put together is helping to bridge that a little bit, give people confidence to move into that and
Yeah.
take action on what they've learned from the analysis.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we do one more thing too that we didn't used to, and that is once we know the top opportunities, let's say there's 10 of them, we go back out to customers and we ask them a whole variety of questions about that particular outcome. Like, why is it a problem? What's the root cause? What's your workaround? Things like that. So we really have a lot of good background information on each unmet need. So when we go into ideation, working with the company and the team to come up with solutions, they have a really good knowledge about the problem, why it's an issue,
Mm-hmm.
what the root cause is, and potentially how to fix it, which really makes ideation easy, I have to say. Once you have all that information, coming up with the right solution really isn't that hard. These people that
Right.
work in the companies are very smart. They're not lacking ideas or intelligence or creativity. They're just lacking a good understanding of the problem.
Yep. Fantastic. Okay. So some good changes there to recognize how can people not just put this into use, but take that next step. And I like the stats that you guys collected, 86, I think you said 86% of
Yeah.
people finding success that you put this in place, but 40% at the time were not taking action on what they learned on the analysis. And so now added to that project cohort to get there. So very good.
Yep.
Lots of good insights. We do have one more question coming up for you, which was sent to me by a listener of this podcast, as well as an innovation quote I want to discuss. But first, I am able to fund this podcast that's been going on now for almost 10 years by the training courses that I provide product managers and leaders. And the course that I want to tell you about today is focused on product management and leadership skills, which also allows you to earn a professional certification from PDMA. It is the training that prepares you for product mastery and really is focused on those 7 research-backed knowledge areas that this podcast is built around that you need to understand. Most people who take this training already have several years of experience. They know a lot. And the Rapid Product Mastery Experience, the RPM experience, is a course that will integrate that knowledge and really add to it. If you're serious about creating more value for customers, improving your team, and growing your own career, the RPM experience is something you should check out. Go to productmasterynow.com and learn more about the training and get started, I hope. That's again, productmasterynow.com. On to a question from a listener. This was sent to me by Diane Sepner, who asks, jobs to be done requires digging deeper into what the customer means and not just doing what they have said. As we are in a more distributed remote environment these days, how do you recommend observing customers when they may be in different places or a different location than you?
Yeah, that's really a great question because it brings up a couple of issues. One is the concept of observing customers. And I've always fought back against this a little bit. When you're observing customers, you're watching what they're doing. That's solution space, right? What you want to understand is what are they trying to accomplish by doing what they're doing? That's problem space. And what I've seen is that it's much easier to train practitioners when you just keep them focused in problem space. If they have to watch something and they're in solution space and constantly try to take that and translate it back into problem space, that's an extra burden. We don't generally observe customers. In fact, what we like to do is take them out of their environment and put them in a room with us and begin asking questions about creating the job map. Let's assume we have the job map done, right? The first step in the job. What's the first thing you're trying to accomplish when you're trying to find access to the portal, right? Or whatever the step might be. And you just try to collect a set of outcomes. What you're trying to do is to get the interviewee in a mindset where they're thinking through what they are trying to do, not what they're doing. We're trying to take them out of solution space as well. So they're not describing the products they're using or how they're interfacing with it. Again, all solution space. The trick is to get them into problem space and keep them in problem space. So we actually find it easier taking them out of their environment and putting them in our environment. The other thing we do that makes this easier, and that's been a big difference, made a big difference for us, is we train them to become good interviewees. So we tell them what we're doing, right? We tell them about the job. Here's the job. We have them validate the job for us. This is what you're trying to accomplish. Yes. We have them help us build out the job map, and we validate with more people. Is this the steps that you're going through? Yes. And then we get into the outcomes as well. And something we've done different in the past 5 years or so is what I call immersion sessions. Whenever I do interviews, my preference is to get the same 3 to 5 people, book them for 2-hour sessions, 4 or 5 of them over a 2 to 3 week period, and work with the same 2 to 3, 4 or 5 people to validate the job step, to come up with the job map, and to create most of the outcomes. Now you have most of this built, most of the framework is discovered. Then you go out to individuals in a more diverse set of customers to really fill in the gaps. Have them review what you've already collected, have them add to any outcomes that might not exist already that they have that weren't considered. And it's more of a collaborative effort with the interviewees, right? And this is interesting. A typical, in the old-fashioned way, in a typical old-fashioned interview, neither the interviewee or the interviewer know what input they're looking for. Think about that, right? They don't know what they're trying to collect. They're just collecting stuff.
We're exploring. Yep.
We're exploring. Well, we're flipping that around. We know what information we're trying to collect. We're trying to collect outcome statements in a very specific format. And we show them that, and we teach them that. So within a half hour or so, they're talking our language, right? Now both parties know what information we're looking for, and we can collaboratively work together to get that information. And that's why I like taking that same group of people for a few sessions, because they're learning. They're learning to speak outcome language, and they can really help us build out the model and the framework. And that goes a long way. Instead of doing 30 one-on-one interviews for an hour and try to piece it together, working with the same group of people for a short period of time and then validating it with more people later has proven to be a much more effective approach.
I suspect, so if you're doing these immersion sessions, you've said 4 to 5 people involved in that, deeper dives, that some people say 4 or 5 people, that's all. I suspect that you don't very often find anything that meaningful when you go past that group. That's just my guess, that when you do get others involved, review the findings, my guess is your 4 to 5 actually gives you the majority, if not all of the information.
Yeah, we find it's in the 80% range.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's right. And then what we do from there is we'll even interview people in different countries, because we work with a lot of global companies, and they want us to be able to hand them a set of outcomes that have been validated worldwide. So we'll collect most of the inputs in the US in English and then translate them into other languages and go out to those other geographies and validate that there's nothing missing and that they're correct and that they understand what they mean and things like that. And that makes it a heck of a lot easier.
Okay, so today you're focused on these deep dive interviews. You are collaborating with them really over the process. This is what a job is to us. This was what we think you're trying to accomplish. Let's refine that. This is what outcomes look like to us. This is our job map of steps. So in some sense, kind of co-creating the understanding of the problem with the customer. This just in contrast to some other things that were done in the past, my real introduction that at least what I call kind of my real introduction to innovation was stumbling into ethnography and didn't know what that term was or anything. And I have found in my past high value in user observations. And one of the case studies that I very much like from your work, because it's tangible, is the skill saw and how construction workers tend to use skill saws and then homeowners as well. And that did use ethnography, right? That was observing tradespeople on site interacting with a skilled saw. Yeah. And so clearly there was value in that, but this is one of these examples of like, here's something that we did that worked, and now we think this is working better. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, that's right. And here's the nuance. When we did those observational research interviews on the circular saw, we know what we're looking for, right? So we know we're looking for outcomes. So we're not just watching them, right? We're asking them, why are they doing each thing? What are they trying to achieve next, and so on. So we know how to interview them, despite the fact that we're watching them in solution space. So we're almost ignoring the solution space aspect and trying to understand everything happening in problem space and documenting that. But what we find is for most practitioners, interviewers, that's hard. It's actually much easier just to take the people, put them in your space, and just have them slowly go through the job they're trying to get done. And when I say slowly, in my instructions, I say, this is in super slow motion. We're going to go through from the start of this job to the very end. It's going to take us 3 hours. It's very slow. I may write down one statement every 5 minutes. It's a slow process. And that's what we work through, right? But in 3 hours, we have a whole bunch of outcome statements, and off we go. So it's that kind of nuance.
Yeah, important distinction. Yeah. With that to me kind of suggests that, let me get your opinion on this. Seems like it could be helpful to have people doing the interviews, whether it's that focus on solution space observations interviews of the circular saw example, or today your deeper dive immersion sessions, that have less experience with the domain. Because I have found that people that really understand the domain well, that know all about circular saws, for example, tend to make assumptions about what people need, right?
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, if you're not familiar with the space, then going out there watching, what we do a lot of times too, and have for years, is we'll go watch videos, go to YouTube, go see what an excavator does, for example, and there's so much information, and now with AI and ChatGPT and so on, there's so much information out there. We've been experimenting with that for over a year, with the AI, and what we find is that it's a useful tool for a savvy practitioner. Our prompts help generate a job map and help generate a set of outcomes. Are they real? Who the heck knows? Is our client going to be confident that they're going to get a great result if we don't talk to any actual customers? No, nobody has said that yet. Nobody said, no, it's okay not to talk to customers. It's a good way to get some background on a topic and to make sure you're covering everything. I'd say that's its use, but maybe it's sometime soon where we could be so confident in it that it produces better results than a practitioner. But what we find is a trained practitioner armed with AI is a really good tool set.
Very good. I think we'll see more and more of that going on, where we have our AI partner on as practitioners. Yep. Okay, thank you for responding to that. Diana, thank you for the question. Listeners, if you want to submit a question to future guests, just follow me on LinkedIn and you'll see who's coming up. Innovation quotes we also love. What's the quote that you have for us, and what does it mean to you?
It's funny because I've had this quote in my mind for years. I live by it, but I looked up the exact version of the quote. It's by Einstein, and there's 3 versions of it because now with ChatGPT, it's all the variations that have happened over time. But the quote is, If I had one hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution, which is pretty much what we've talked about for all this time here today, right? Is how do you make that happen in the world of innovation? How do you define the problem, right, at this very granular level? And then, of course, once we have the problem well defined and you know what you're ideating around, coming up with the solution truly is easy. I've seen it happen. You mentioned the Bosch example. When they were presented with their 14 unmet needs, they solved all of them in 3 hours. That's it. And as they said, we had a lot of these ideas before. The problem is we've had thousands of ideas before. We didn't know that these were the 14 that really meant anything to the customer. But yet they were all prioritized. So I live by that quote, and I love that thinking.
That's excellent. Yeah, if there's so many things that we could do, it's hard to know what to actually take action on. So.
Yeah.
Very good. Thanks for the quote. It is one of my favorites as well, to clearly understand what the problem is before we try to move into a solution. It's probably pretty easy for people to find your books. I suspect we can go to Amazon and make that happen. But how can people find out more about the work that you're doing, the work that Strategen's doing, resources you have?
Well, it's a couple things. I have a free book, not the one there, but the other book, The Jobs to Be Done, Theory to Practice. If you go to jobstobedonebook.com, all hyphens, jobs-to-be-done-book.com, you can download a ebook version of that or an audiobook version of that for free. So that's a great starting point. Other than that, there's plenty of material on our website at Strategen.com. There's a resource center there that has access to tons of white papers. There's videos out there. One of my favorite, if you go to YouTube, it's What is Jobs to Be Done? It's an 8-minute video. It just summarizes in a nice way, I think, how Jobs to Be Done helps you think differently about innovation and brings predictability to the process. And of course, if you just want to contact me, I'm at Alwick@Strategen.com.
That makes that easy. People can reach out directly. Okay. Tony, really appreciate the information. So glad you could spend the 500th episode with us. I was mentioning around the house the other day that this is the longest running podcast for product managers. My son went to went to ChatGPT and typed it in. What is the longest running podcast for product managers? Lo and behold, ChatGPT believes it is also this podcast. So that was great.
They got it right. That's perfect.
They got it right.
Again, congratulations on that. I know that is quite a feat. And perseverance is a key to success. So it's good to see you hanging in there.
Thank you. And likewise, appreciate that you have not given up on helping organizations to get better at innovation, and that you are continuously learning how to do that better, and your team, and really excited to see organizations that have embraced that to see such benefit from it. And no, these are the things that we need to be doing to create satisfaction for our customer and generate new value for them. So great body of work.
Thanks, Chad. I appreciate it.
And listeners, you can find the written version of everything we discussed as an article at productmasterynow.com/500. As always, keep innovating.
Thank you for listening to Product Mastery Now, where product leaders and managers gain product mastery through practical knowledge, influence, and confidence. By listening, you are becoming a product master, creating products customers love. Find additional resources at productmasterynow.com. Keep innovating.